Well, thank you so much, Jennifer and daughter, for the reading. That really encapsulates a lot of what I was going to say, so I can just cross out a whole bunch of my sermon because that really hit on some important themes. I've noticed that whenever I give a sermon, that one of the things that much of my topics emerge from the experiences or thoughts I've had since the last time I gave a sermon, and that indeed is I'm staying to form because that's what I'm going to be talking about this morning. Some of you may know that back in July, I left my position as a hospice chaplain. I loved what I was doing, but the business end of what I was doing seemed to be interfering with my what I felt like was kind of like a call to the care that I was giving people. So I quit in July, and I thought, shouldn't be a problem getting another job. And so I took a few weeks off and just kind of relaxed and tried to get adjusted to a new way of going through the day. And then I started sending out a couple of resumes. And I knew I had one company that I knew some of the people there, and they assured me that sometime in September, they'd have a position for me. So I didn't worry too much. But after a while, I thought, I really ought to get something fairly soon. So I sent out some resumes. And some of the jobs that I sent resumes, some of the companies I sent resumes to, I was perfect for those jobs. I mean, there is nothing about what they were asking for that I didn't fulfill, I thought, to the T. And so when I got my first thanks but no thanks rejection letter from one of the companies, I was just shocked. I thought, how could I not even get an interview? Surely I meet their qualifications. But I didn't let that bother me too much. And then I got my second rejection letter. And then I got no response from a lot of companies, right? That's kind of typical. You send out something, they don't say anything. But after a few rejections, thanks, no thanks, I started to get really worried. And I started sending out more resumes and no responses. And so one day I was in my garage at home, and I started noticing that I was just really tense and really concerned about what I was going to do. Now, some of you may recall as well that I decided not to work full time because I wanted part-time positions. That's what I was applying for, but I got so nervous, I thought maybe I should apply for a full-time job. So I did that for a couple of things. But standing in the garage that day, I thought, I used to pray about things like this. I haven't done that in a long time. I think I'm going to pray. So I prayed. Within the next 2 weeks, I had 4 job offers, all part-time. I rejected 2 of them because they just didn't like it, didn't want to do it. One is at a major hospital to be a hospital chaplain, but I didn't like the hours. And then another one was for one of the larger museums in the area. And I sent one out as a lark and had an interview, and they offered me the position. I turned that down. But I had 2 other jobs that I did accept. So I'm starting tomorrow, a hospital chaplain at another hospital system in the local area. And my fun thing is I'm also going to start as an interpreter at Conner Prairie. So I'm going to be in costume at Conner Prairie one of these days. I'm going to start training in sometime either end of this week or next week. So next time you go there and you see some guy in a straw hat and old-timey clothes, it just might be me. Who knows? But I won't acknowledge you, of course, in any way. Anyway, so I thought about, what is it to pray? I mean, what was it that moved me to pray, and what happened during that time? Because I'm very concerned about this marriage of faith and reason. I'm real concerned about whether those things are compatible or whether they're in conflict. In many ways, faith seems reasonable, and then other times faith seems unreasonable. Sometimes reason seems to be too cut and dried, and we need a little bit of the element of mystery that can be a part of what we call faith. So I've been thinking a lot about that. So when I was reminded that I was going to be giving the sermon today, I thought, well, maybe that's what I'll talk about, that experience in my garage and the thinking about it afterwards. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of turn to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. This is from the Department of Philosophy at Stanford University, and it's an online encyclopedia. And if you ever have any questions having to do with philosophy, I'd really encourage you to go there. It's an incredibly interesting site. It's funded by a variety of nonprofits that if you ever watch PBS, you'll see the same names, or NPR, you'll hear the same names. Indiana University is also one of the sponsors of. So this isn't just like, Billy and Johnny putting together a website. There's a little more to it than this. But I want to read just a little bit from the philosophy, from this Encyclopedia of Philosophy having to do with faith. And it says, philosophical accounts are almost exclusively about theistic religious faith, or faith that is centered on the belief in a God or a divine being. They generally, though not exclusively, deal with faith as understood within the Christian branch of the Abrahamic traditions. But although the theistic religious context settles what kind of faith is of interest, the question arises whether faith of that same general kind also belongs to other non-theistic religious contexts, or to contexts not usually thought of as religious at all. It may be apt to speak of the faith of a humanist or even an atheist, using the same general sense of faith. So when we talk about faith, it's not just about a viewpoint of believing in the actions or even existence of some God or divine being, but it has to do with much more than that. So you can go on to say that it's widely held that faith goes beyond what is ordinarily reasonable, according to this Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Faith goes beyond what is ordinarily reasonable, in the sense that it involves accepting what cannot be established as true, through the proper exercise of our naturally endowed human cognitive faculties. So sometimes then, when people pray, and in times past when I prayed, I wanted God to do something that would change what seemed to be the potential, possible, or maybe even likelihood of an event. Maybe I got sick. I wanted God to heal that sickness. Maybe I was in sadness, and I wanted God to just from way on high come down and fix whatever needed to be fixed, beyond what we would think of as ordinary. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, famously reports in the preface to the second edition of his Critique of Pure Reason, "I have found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith." So in his view, then, what we know, what our reason might tell us, is limited, and faith enters in, or must enter in, according to his experience. So a reasonable faith regularly or arguably needs to conform to something more, though. There also has to be some sort of evidence. Often when we say that we have faith, particularly I'm going to focus a little bit on Christians, because that's what the particular form of religious institution that I'm more familiar with. But when Christians say that they have faith, it's usually because they have some sort of reason to believe in faith, either the experiences of other people, or because of something they've read in a book that claims to be, or people have ascribed to it a certain divinity or truthfulness that relates to God's actions in the world. Now, what this comes down to, though, is this important point. My takeaway from thinking about faith is that faith must be based on reason. There isn't a conflict so much, and there is a compatibility, but how does that compatibility come about? Well, to explore, I want to turn to a book of faith that is probably the premier book of faith in the Western world, the handbook of Christian faith, and that's the Bible. Now, some of you may have real problems with the Bible because of the experience that you may have had in the past, so I ask you to bear with me. In the New Testament, which was written in Greek, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1, there is a definition of faith. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. The New Revised Standard Version, or the NRSV, tends to be considered a more scholarly translation. It was used during my undergraduate studies classes at Indiana University, and it was also used in my seminary, where academic and intellectual endeavors were very much a part of our studies. But in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, it says this: "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things the conviction of things not seen." Let me read that again. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. I want to break that down a little bit. I'm going to do an old-time Bible study like I used to do when I was a minister in the church. So you really need to hang in there if you don't mind. But let's break this down. First of all, the word faith. The Greek word for faith is pistis, and it means the conviction of the truth of anything, a belief, generally with the included idea of trust. So we believe or we trust something. To believe and to trust is based upon the assurance from that verse in the NRSV, assurance, which in Greek is hypostasis, and it means a foundation. That which has a foundation is firm, it's real. So then our beliefs must be based on something that's firm and it's real. And it says of things hoped for, which is elpidzoto. Elpidzoto means hope. And in a religious sense, it means to hopefully trust in. And then for the conviction, which is elengos in Greek, a proof that by which a thing is proved or tested. And then finally, a belief of things. Things, now put this together. Things is pragma, that which has been done, a deed, an accomplished fact. What is done or being accompanied, that which is or exists. And then not seen, which in Greek is blepo. And it means then with the bodily eye, to possess of sight, have the power of seeing, or metaphorically, to have the power of understanding. So we go back to that then, to that Greek word, that verse in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Some other translations maybe help define or explain that verse. The New Century Version translates that verse: faith means being sure of things we hope for and knowing that something is real even if we do not see it. It's hoping for something that we believe in, even though we don't see it. The King James Bible says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So there are many things that I believe in that I have not seen. I've never seen the Eiffel Tower in France, but by virtue of my formidable powers of reason, I believe that it exists. I've never traveled to outer space to look out at Earth, but I believe that it's probably reasonable, based upon the testimony of other folks, to believe that it's round. There's a preponderance of evidence to back up these claims, and their truthfulness seems logical based on my life experiences and the way that I have perceived the world around me. On the other hand, I've been told that if I hit myself in the head with a hammer, it will hurt. I've never done that, but I believe that based upon my past experiences with physical pain, that is probably true. So I resist any temptations to do it. Now, what about that prayer? What was it? Or what was I doing when I prayed? And I'll have to tell you that I prayed to God. But I want to explain to you how I view God based upon my experiences. I think the best way to explain it is to substitute the word God for what I consider it to be, which I consider it to be a way of looking at or thinking about or speaking or naming reality. So I substitute in my head reality when I say God. So when I ask God to do something or to intervene or whatever it is that I ask, what I'm hoping for is that something about the reality of the world that we live in may result in a positive outcome. But because I'm dealing with reality, then I know that that may not be the case. And it also tells me that many times the outcome of any particular desire or hope is often dependent upon me. So when I'm asking God, will you, or I want you to, what I'm really saying is, Don, you got to do this, or think about this a little more. So when I was in my garage and I asked for comfort and for help, I felt an incredible feeling of peace. And the reason I felt that peace was I realized that it's up to me, and you know what? It's okay. I know what to do. I trust myself. If there's something else I need to do, I trust myself to figure it out. The reality then is what I'm referring to. And this is kind of something that's very true in Christian tradition and faith, by the way. There's a professor, a theologian, his name was Marcus Borg. He died several years ago, but he was the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at University of Oregon, or maybe it was Oregon State. I don't know, but he was in Oregon. I have faith that he was in Oregon, because I remember reading about it. I went to one of his lectures, and when he talked about, we see that in Christian language, often we use certain terms or words that many of us have to kind of translate in our heads. So, for example, my work of when I hear the word God, I think of reality. I kind of translate that in my head, and it makes sense to me based upon my experiences. For someone else, that may not be the case. See, and remember those earlier comments from the Unitarian Church in Asheville, North Carolina. And what undergirds the faith of Unitarian Universalists around the world is that we each, based upon our experiences, come to an understanding, or we attempt to come to an understanding of the meaning and the purpose of living in our world. And when we share the way that we have come about or come to those positions, and we support one another in our own individual journeys of faith and life, then we build ourselves up, not as a community based upon a certain particular belief. Like, you don't have to believe or you don't have to, in your mind, translate the word God to the idea of reality. That's just my own thing. You may have a different feeling. There may be Unitarians who believe in a divine being. There may be Unitarians who believe in some sort of superior, higher power. There may be Unitarians that are atheists and don't believe in any of that, but they find a sense of meaning and purpose in other ways. We can all sit under the same roof when we come together to sit under a roof together. We support one another. And I think one of the most important statements is that we're not gathered together because of a religious belief. We're gathered together to support one another as we attempt to understand what meaning is in our life. So I don't believe that because I prayed, I got the jobs that I got. I mean, that would, according to my sense of reason, that would mean then that some recruiter somewhere's got all these resumes. It's very possible they had someone else in mind, but God zapped their minds and caused them to shove that resume apart, shuffle through their papers and find mine and say, this is the one. Now, maybe that didn't happen, but gosh, I just can't believe that would happen. Because what about the person who didn't get the job? Are they less deserving than I am? If God did that, if God did manipulate, then indeed there's kind of a way of saying that one person deserved it because I was in a garage praying and another person did not. And for some reason, my sense of reason doesn't quite align with that. Maybe someone was in a really difficult financial situation who really needed that job, but God gave it to me because I prayed and they didn't. What if we had both prayed? Which one did God choose to get the job and why? Was I more deserving? Let's look at other situations. You know, I follow a few folks on Facebook, whether I want to or not. Periodically, I see that someone knows someone who has fallen on difficult times. It could be a job loss or an illness, and they're asking everyone to pray for a good outcome for this person. And other people will respond and say, yeah, I want you to know I'm praying. And then sometimes if they're Christians, they'll say, you know, my whole church is praying. And then other people say, yeah, I'm also having my church pray. It's almost this feeling like God has to be ganged up on in order to answer a prayer. So it's like, you know, God says, well, you know, if you have a cold, I need 2 people praying. If you have a really serious illness, I'll need at least a couple hundred. That doesn't seem reasonable. Maybe it's okay. Maybe that's how it works. But in my experience and in my sense of reason, that's not how I view the reality of our world. What about athletes who thank God when they make a touchdown or their team wins? What is that saying about God? You know, on Sunday afternoon, God's sitting around watching NBC or ESPN. Now, if that's the case, God must not be very consistent. And he must get pretty upset at times because even Tom Brady loses once in a while. I know here in Indiana, we hope he loses all the time, but you know, that's just not reality again. What about war? Which side does God listen to? People are dying on both sides. So, someone here in the crowd said America. America. So Abraham Lincoln had that controversy, didn't he? He understood that, you know, that both sides in the Civil War were praying to God. What a conflict that is. How do we deal with that? So once again, the statement from the UU Church in Nashville, North Carolina. Unitarian Universalism is a faith tradition which encourages each individual to develop a personal faith. What holds Unitarian Universalists together is not common belief, but common experience and a common approach to life. So you can believe the way you believe. I can believe the way I believe. But when we experience our lives together as a community, and we take from whatever tradition we emerge out of and use that as a way to think about how do we make our lives and how do we make this world a better place, whether we're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, humanist, atheist, agnostic, we can all form together a community. And you know, this is almost unheard of in the world. If you think about that, Unitarian Universalism is almost unheard of in the history of humankind. We are in many ways a very unique religious community. The Asheville Church said Unitarian Universalists believe in the Golden Rule. loving our neighbors as ourselves, working for a better world, searching for truth with an open mind, using reason to help us explore religious ideas, and granting everyone the right to choose their own beliefs. So using our intelligence, our human quality of love, we try to make this world a better place. Perhaps we believe that there are unseen sacred aspects of existence that help us. Well, that's our belief. And what about prayer? Is it a magical incantation that forces a capricious deity to bend to our will? Erica Hewitt, who is the UUA's Minister of Worship Arts, wrote, "Prayer is one word for the alignment of our full attention with our desire to connect with that which is larger than us." That, I think, by the way, is an amazingly good summation of prayer. Prayer is one word for the alignment of our full attention with our desire to connect with that which is larger than us. It can take many forms, she writes, from the quiet cultivation of stillness to the deliberate naming of all that we're grateful for. Whatever its form, prayer also creates an internal shift, me in my garage, from fear and worry to a reminder that all is good. It's fine. I'll work it out. I have support. I have people who care for me. I have a certain amount of, a little bit of intelligence that might help. As renowned theologian Reinhold Niebuhr noted, Reverend Hewitt continues, prayer does not change things. Prayer changes people, and people change things. Isn't that great? Prayer does not change things. Prayer changes people, and people change things. Prayer is not hearing voices. Prayer is acquiring a voice. She concludes, when it comes to prayer and meditation, how it works is less important than its practice. Prayer is a way to connect and reconnect to ourselves and to that which is life-giving. The mechanics don't matter as much as the intention, remembering ourselves as magnificent, fragile vessels of love, sometimes with intimates and sometimes with strangers, and affirming our choice to remain connected so that we're not lost in the vastness of space and time. So may your faith grow with reason, intelligence, and most of all, love. Blessed be.